Rachel Maddow thought she could corner Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on live television about progressive policies. But what followed left the MSNBC host speechless and turned Crockett into an overnight sensation. Within 24 hours, a fiery 15-second clip of the exchange had racked up more than 10 million views, sparking a national conversation about media accountability. The set was charged with anticipation as Maddow, in her trademark sharp suit and gleaming glasses, leaned forward with her trademark aggressive style. Research stacked high and producers confident they had another ratings-driving takedown in the making. But Crockett, the 43-year-old Texas congresswoman and former civil rights attorney, sat with calm confidence, her posture relaxed yet alert, radiating the quiet determination of someone who knew she wasn't there to play defense. What began as a routine interview about Democratic Party unity turned into one of the most devastating political clapbacks of 2025, a masterclass in how to handle media bullies, and communication experts across the country are already studying Crockett's techniques. To understand why the clash was so explosive, it's important to know who these two women are. At 52, Rachel Maddow has built an empire at MSNBC, pulling over 2 million nightly viewers and commanding a $7 million salary as one of the most influential figures in liberal media. Famous for her intense preparation, rapid-fire questioning, and devastating document dump style, Maddow has interviewed presidents, taken down politicians, and set the political conversation for over 15 years. Sitting across from her that night, however, was someone immune to intimidation. Crockett, who rose from civil rights law into Congress, had already built a reputation for fiery speeches, viral social media moments, and breaking down complex issues into plain language. Her courtroom battles against predatory lenders and discriminatory banks gave her a toughness few politicians possessed, and her ability to dismantle arguments on the spot made her uniquely dangerous in a live interview. Unlike polished career politicians, Crockett carried the instinct of a trial lawyer, quick, fearless, and unafraid of confrontation. Maddow had planned to press her on Democratic progressive overreach ahead of the 2026 midterms, but what unfolded instead was a confrontation so electrifying that it redefined Crockett's national profile overnight. For weeks, Rachel Maddow had been building a narrative on her show that progressive Democrats were dragging the party too far left, creating what seemed like a consensus that bold policies like Medicare for all or the Green New Deal were electoral suicide. Night after night, she brought on strategists and pollsters to argue that progressives were alienating suburban moderates, and this interview with Jasmine Crockett was meant to be the capstone, a televised moment where a progressive lawmaker would be forced to concede that her movement was costing Democrats elections. Maddow came in confident, armed with polling data and her trademark authoritative tone, but what she didn't expect was that Crockett had done her homework, too. From the moment the cameras rolled, the contrast was striking. Maddow leaned in with her usual intensity, while Crockett sat poised, sharp-eyed, and ready. Maddow opened with a loaded question, framing progressive policies as electoral poison, but Crockett didn't take the bait. Instead, she smiled slightly and countered with trial lawyer's precision. "Rachel, that's an interesting way to frame it. But before we talk polling, shouldn't we talk about results? Because the data I'm looking at tells a very different story." It was a textbook move, reject the framework and create her own. When Maddow pressed harder, pointing to Democratic losses in states like Virginia and New Jersey, Crockett leaned in, her voice calm but unyielding. "Are we really going to blame progressive policies?" she asked. "While ignoring that in deep red Texas, I won my district by running on Medicare for all, affordable housing, and criminal justice reform? Are we going to ignore that progressive candidates across the country are winning by energizing voters who had given up on politics?" The energy in the studio shifted. Maddow's confidence flickered for a split second, and sensing it, she tried to reassert control, rifling through her papers dramatically to signal she had the receipts. Then came the sharpest jab yet. "But Congresswoman, with all due respect, winning in a gerrymandered Texas district is very different from winning statewide or appealing to suburban voters. Don't you think it's somewhat irresponsible to push policies polling shows are unpopular with the voters Democrats need to win?" The word irresponsible landed heavy, hanging in the air like a challenge. For most politicians, it would have been the moment to backpedal, to soften their stance. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't most politicians. Her calm expression hardened, her voice still measured but now carrying steel. And that was the moment the interview shifted from a routine grilling into a political showdown no one in that studio, or watching at home, would ever forget. Rachel Crockett's counterattack came like a thunderclap. Rachel, I find it fascinating that you're lecturing me about responsibility, when your show has spent weeks telling Democrats to abandon the policies that actually help working families. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you had to choose between paying for prescription drugs and paying rent? The question landed like lightning, instantly flipping the power dynamic. Maddow, suddenly on the defensive, muttered that her personal circumstances weren't relevant. But her voice had lost its edge. Crockett pressed harder, her voice gaining force. Oh, but they absolutely are. Because you're sitting here in a studio making millions, telling working families they should accept less. You're telling them that wanting affordable health care is irresponsible. You're telling them that wanting their kids to have a livable planet is too radical. Maddow tried to salvage the interview, falling back on strategic considerations, but Crockett pounced. Her voice rose with passion as she listed the struggles in her district. Families rationing insulin, young people drowning in debt, parents living in cars because rent was out of reach. The tension in the studio was electric. Even Maddow's staff behind the cameras looked shaken. When Maddow suggested progressive rhetoric was about feeling good, Crockett's eyes flashed, and she delivered her kill shot. Is it rhetoric when a mother has to ration her child's insulin? Is it rhetoric when families live in their cars? Is it rhetoric when young people give up their dreams because they can't afford college? What's rhetoric, Rachel, is sitting in $1 million studio, funded by corporate advertisers, telling people fighting for survival that their struggle is politically inconvenient. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came the line that would break the internet. You want to talk about what's irresponsible? What's irresponsible is a media personality who makes $7 million a year telling working families that fighting for their survival is too radical. What's irresponsible is someone who hasn't faced a real struggle in decades, lecturing people who are fighting for their lives about political strategy. The color drained from Maddow's face. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Crockett wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, quoting numbers that showed progressive candidates who ran boldly on Medicare for all and student debt relief had won, while those who ran away from those policies had lost. Then she looked straight into the camera and asked when Maddow had last talked to a working family, last worried about bills, last chosen between convenience and conscience. Maddow tried to rally, snapping that she spent her career fighting corruption, but Crockett cut her down with surgical precision. From where I sit, it looks like you spent your career building a brand. The words landed like a closing argument, and Maddow's persona cracked. She grew flushed, raised her voice, even shouted about her commitment to progressive causes. Crockett stayed calm, almost cold. You want to talk about disrespect? The disrespect is telling families their struggles don't matter because they're not politically convenient. The disrespect is using your platform to attack the people fighting for them. The disrespect, Rachel, is thinking your opinion matters more than their lives. The studio was silent but for the cameras. Maddow sat stunned, her famous quick wit gone. And then, with deliberate calm, Crockett stood. The cameras scrambled to follow as she declared, "You know what, Rachel? We're done here. I came to talk about the future of the Democratic Party. But it's clear you're more interested in protecting the status quo than fighting for change. When you're ready for a real conversation, you know where to find me. Until then, maybe spend less time telling others how to do their jobs and more time asking whether you're doing yours." And with that, Jasmine Crockett walked off the MSNBC set, leaving Rachel Maddow sitting alone, pale and speechless. The interview, scheduled for 20 minutes, had lasted only 8. But those 8 minutes shook progressive politics, redefined the rules of media engagement, and turned Crockett into a force no television host or party leader could afford to ignore. Something extraordinary happened. Within minutes, clips from the interview began spreading across social media faster than wildfire, and it quickly became clear this wasn't just another political moment destined to be forgotten in the next news cycle. It was the birth of a movement. The first clip hit Twitter at 9:47 p.m. Eastern, only 3 minutes after the interview ended, capturing the 15-second segment where Crockett delivered her final line. When you're ready to have a real conversation about what it means to fight for working families, you know where to find me. Within 10 minutes, it had 50,000 views. Within an hour, it soared past 500,000. And by midnight, it was closing in on 2 million and climbing. The real explosion came when someone posted the longer clip, the full exchange where Crockett systematically dismantled Matt's arguments while Maddow sat speechless, and that video broke every social platform at once. On Twitter, hashtag Crockett Destroys Rachel started trending within 20 minutes, not just in political circles but nationwide, competing with sport highlights and celebrity gossip for the top spot. TikTok moved even faster. Young progressives hungry for someone to challenge liberal media orthodoxy seized the moment, churning out videos acting out Maddow's stunned reactions or celebrating Crockett's sharp takedown, while the hashtag Crockett Energy began trending among Gen Z users who turned her words into a soundtrack for their own moments of defiance. Meme culture erupted overnight. Rachel Maddow's stunned silence became instant fodder from GIFs captioned when someone finally calls out your hypocrisy on live TV, to split screens contrasting Maddow's polished studio with families struggling overlaid by Crockett's devastating line. Maybe the problem is that you forgot what this fight is actually about. But the most viral meme of all was a simple screenshot of Crockett walking off set with a caption, "When you're done tolerating BS from people who should be allies." That single image was shared hundreds of thousands of times, crystallizing the frustration progressives felt toward liberal media. Remixed videos, dramatic montages, and photo collages flooded Instagram, with one viral grid showing 8 stages of Maddow's unraveling from smug confidence to stunned silence. The impact wasn't confined to social media. Within hours, political commentators and politicians were already calling it the Crockett moment. Progressives who had long bristled at liberal media's criticism rallied behind her, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeting, "This is what it looks like when someone refuses to be bullied by media elites who've forgotten what we're fighting for." And Bernie Sanders declaring, "Jasmine Crockett spoke truth to power tonight. The fight for working families is not too radical. It's necessary." Even moderate Democrats admitted she had voiced frustrations many shared. And in a surprising twist, conservative commentators like Tucker Carlson praised her courage, noting, "You don't have to agree with Jasmine Crockett's politics to respect the way she stood up to media bullying." That took guts. Suddenly, the moment was no longer partisan. It was being framed as someone exposing the disconnect between media elites and the people they claimed to represent. For 24 hours, Maddow went silent, her usually busy Twitter feed dormant, while MSNBC attempted damage control with a statement calling it a robust exchange of ideas, a phrase immediately mocked online as more like a one-sided demolition. When Maddow finally returned on air, her attempt to spin Crockett's dismantling his passion only backfired, spawning the trending phrase Crockett's passionate destruction, where viewers insisted what they had witnessed wasn't passion. It was precision. Legal experts even noted that Crockett had conducted what looked like a courtroom cross-examination, exposing contradictions with surgical clarity. Beyond the viral frenzy, something fundamental had shifted. For years, liberal media figures like Maddow had acted as gatekeepers of progressive politics, but Crockett shattered that dynamic, proving progressive politicians didn't need elite media's blessing and might be stronger without it. The interview sparked a broader reckoning with liberal media's role, energizing young activists who had long accused of timidity and emboldening older progressives who remembered when journalists were adversarial rather than comfortable insiders. The political impact was immediate and measurable. In the 48 hours after the interview, Crockett's campaign raised more money than it had in the previous 3 months combined, with donors explicitly citing the Maddow interview in their notes, while other progressive candidates saw bumps in donations from people hungry for leaders who would fight like Jasmine. The message was unmistakable. Progressive voters wanted politicians who would challenge not just Republicans, but the entire political establishment, including its liberal media wing. In the weeks that followed, the Crockett effect began reshaping the landscape as young progressives adopted a more confrontational approach in their media appearances, refusing to appease hosts they saw as out of touch, while progressive organizations themselves began rethinking their strategies for engaging with the media establishment. In the weeks that followed, the Crockett-Maddow confrontation continued to reverberate across progressive politics, with many deciding to bypass traditional, liberal media outlets altogether in favor of direct communication with voters through social platforms and grassroots organizing. Major progressive groups like Justice Democrats and the Sunrise Movement announced new policies urging their endorsed candidates to confront, rather than appease, media personalities who they believed undermined their message, while some organizations went further, creating media accountability initiatives that tracked how often liberal hosts grilled progressives, compared conservatives, and how much airtime was devoted to critiquing progressive policies versus Republican ones. When the data was released, it was damning, validating Crockett's arguments about bias within supposedly allied outlets and placing liberal media in an uncomfortable position. They had built their brands as the voice of the resistance, yet progressive politicians were increasingly treating them as part of the very establishment they were resisting. The Crockett-Maddow exchange marked a turning point, proving that old media gatekeepers were losing their power to define the limits of progressive discourse, and that voters craved authenticity over calculation. Crockett's refusal to soften her message for media approval resonated with millions of Americans who were tired of politicians more concerned with coverage than change, transforming the interview into a cultural touchstone dissected in journalism schools as a case study in how traditional interviews can implode, and in political science classrooms as an example of shifting power between politicians and media. Young viewers who had never heard of either Crockett or Maddow before suddenly knew both names. Crockett as a symbol of political courage, Maddow as the face of media complacency. Months later, the moment still echoed. Pulling a Crockett became shorthand for refusing to back down under media pressure, while getting Maddow described when a host was humiliated by their own guest. More importantly, the confrontation ignited a conversation about accountability, not only for politicians, but for the media figures who covered them, crystallized by Crockett's devastating challenge. When was the last time you had to make a real sacrifice for your political beliefs? A question viewers began asking of others, often with uncomfortable answers. What made the showdown so powerful wasn't just a spectacle of a television personality's silence on our own show, but the substance beneath it, a genuine argument over what progressive politics should look like, and who had the authority to decide. Crockett entered the MSNBC studio as a relatively unknown congresswoman from Texas and walked out as the voice of a new generation of progressives unwilling to be told they were too radical for defending working families. Maddow, meanwhile, never fully recovered her credibility, her authority fractured by the revelation that some liberal media elites were more invested in their own status than the struggles they claimed to champion. The 8-minute clash, framed as a discussion on democratic unity, instead exposed deep rifts within progressive media and politics, and out of those divisions, a new kind of leadership was born, one that answered to voters, not gatekeepers. Crockett's final words still echo as a defining lesson. Maybe the problem isn't my message. Maybe the problem is that you've forgotten what this fight is actually about. In that single line, she captured the frustration of millions, proving that the most important battles are not always waged against open opponents, but often against those who claim to be allies yet forget why the fight began. The Crockett moment reminded America that sometimes the fiercest confrontations happen not in Congress or on the campaign trail, but in the television studios where narratives are forged, and in those spaces, one voice, armed with courage and conviction, can change everything in just a few minutes.